Well, when I get introduced and people say, well, he really doesn't need any introduction, that really means there's not a lot to talk about. That's code for that, and that's okay, right? Now, last couple times, by the way, I lost my voice about halfway through, and I apologize. I think I'm in good shape here today, but time will tell, so I beg your indulgence if, in fact, I fail a little bit here. But we're talking about a very interesting individual today, and that is James Otis Jr. Now, I've done some research on Mr. Otis, and I got to tell you, and by the way, does he have a sister?
Yes.
Who's his sister?
Like we talked about last time.
Yes, Mercy. Do you remember Mercy from last month? That's his sister. So the Otis family is an incredible family. And just a side note before I get off into the woods here, their father was Colonel Otis, and he was a very prominent attorney and well respected in the New England area as well. So, let's get going here. John Adams once called him the most important character in the whole drama of the Revolution. And yet today, history has nearly erased his name. He did not sign the Declaration of Independence. He did not lead men into battle. He never sat in the president's chair. But what he did, ladies and gentlemen, may have mattered more than any of these. He struck a spark. Before there were soldiers, there was a voice. Before there were battles, there was a courtroom, ladies and gentlemen. And before there was a nation, there was one man standing alone, daring to speak when nobody else would. We remember Washington, the father of our country. We remember Jefferson for the words that declared our freedom. But this man, this fiery mind from Massachusetts, may rightfully be called the father of American independence, for he made all the rest possible. He was the first to rise, the first to thunder for liberty, the first to give voice to a principle so dangerous, so electric, that the British Empire would spend the next 20 years trying to silence it. Taxation without representation is tyranny. Those words spread like wildfire through the colonies, from Boston's meeting halls to Virginia's plantations, from Philadelphia's taverns to the farms of Lexington and Concord. With those words, ladies and gentlemen, a revolution was born. And it wasn't on a battlefield. It was in a courtroom on a cold winter morning with one man's voice, James Otis Jr. Ladies and gentlemen, this is his story. James Otis Jr. was born February 5th, 1725 in West Barnstable, Massachusetts. His father was a prominent lawyer who gave young James the finest education available, Harvard College at 18 years old. But this wasn't just book learning. James studied the classics, philosophy, and the very tools that would shape his revolutionary mind and his revolutionary thinking. He learned about natural rights, the idea that all people are born with fundamental freedoms, such as life, liberty, and happiness, civic virtue, and resistance to tyranny from ancient Greeks and Romans. After Harvard, Otis quickly established himself as one of Massachusetts' most brilliant lawyers. By 1748, he was admitted to the bar, and his legal reputation soared. He was so well thought of, he was appointed Advocate General of the Vice Admiralty Court, a prestigious position that put him at the center of the colonial commerce and British maritime law. But here's where Otis's story becomes interesting. As Advocate General, his position required him to enforce British policies that negatively affected Boston merchants. Yet Otis personally sided with the Boston merchants in the colonial's conflict with Britain. The moral conflict was tearing him apart, enforcing laws he increasingly believed were unjust. What made him special, ladies and gentlemen, was not his legal skills. It was his ability to combine Enlightenment philosophy, English law, and the American colonial experience into a powerful argument for colonial rights. Otis was known for his theatrical courtroom style and razor-sharp wit. Fellow lawyers described him as having an almost supernatural ability to dissect legal arguments, finding flaws that others missed entirely. His photographic memory allowed him to quote extensive passages from Cicero, Locke, and English legal precedents without notes. He could switch seamlessly between Latin, Greek, and English in a single argument, leaving opposing counsel scrambling to keep up. But even as his professional star rose, his personal life revealed the fault lines that would soon run through all of colonial America. In 1755, ladies and gentlemen, at age 30, Otis married Ruth Cunningham, a union of love and prosperity. She was very rich. But also a profound political division. Their political differences created tension. She was loyal to the crown. But their marriage produced 3 children, James, Elizabeth, and Mary. James Otis Jr. knew both the promise and the price of liberty. His only son, his beloved son, entered the American Naval Service during the Revolution, was captured by the British, and died in a prison at just 18 years old. Their elder daughter, Elizabeth, was a loyalist just like Mom. She married Captain Brown of the British Army and lived in England the rest of her life. The family's political divisions would mirror the larger conflicts that were tearing America apart. The Otis family was remarkable in its intellectual gifts. James' sister, Mercy Otis Warren, subject of our previous program, was herself a brilliant patriot writer who used her pen to advance the revolutionary cause. But here's what's crucial to this lecture that you understand. Otis didn't start as a revolutionary. Like most educated colonial, people, he considers himself a loyal British subject, just seeking reform, not rebellion. His position as Advocate General made him part of the British system he would later challenge. This makes what happened next all that remarkable. Picture this. February 24th, 1761. A crowded courtroom in the Massachusetts State House. British officials want to renew their writs of assistance, general search warrants that led them to ransack any home, any business, any ship looking for smuggled goods. No evidence was needed, no limits, no expiration date. Can you imagine that, by the way? As Advocate General, James Otis Jr. was expected to argue in favor of renewing these writs. It was his job to defend the British policy. But Otis faced an impossible choice. His position required him to enforce the laws that violated everything he believed in about natural rights and English liberty. Natural rights, once again, ladies and gentlemen, are the inherent freedoms and liberties every person possesses by virtue of being born, not granted by government, but a gift from Almighty God. The moral conflict was unbearable, and a decision that would change. I'll say it again. And a decision that would change American history. Some would say world history. Otis did something unprecedented. He resigned his prestigious government position rather than argue for the writs and offered his services as legal counsel to the Boston merchants, refusing to accept a fee. Think about the courage this took, ladies and gentlemen. Otis gave up financial security, government prestige, and his future career to stand for principle. How American is that? Now, standing against the Crown's lawyer was James Otis Jr., and on that February day, that cold February day, he delivered what John Adams called the opening gun of the Revolution. A 5-hour thunderous argument that shook the foundations of the British Empire. A young lawyer named John Adams was there and hanging on every word. He later wrote, "Then and there, the child independence was born." Adams later described the scene, the courtroom scene, in detail. Listen to this, ladies and gentlemen. John Adams wrote, "The courtroom was packed beyond capacity, with spectators standing in the aisles and crowds waiting at the windows. Otis paced before the bench like a caged lion, his voice rising and falling with dramatic effect. At one point, he slammed his fist so hard on the table that the inkwells jumped and spilled, causing nervous laughter from the audience. When he quoted Cicero's condemnation of tyranny, some spectators openly wept. The opposing counsel, representing the Crown, seemed visibly shaken by Otis's performance. Witnesses reported that he shuffled his papers nervously and stumbled over his rebuttals. Even the judges appeared emotionally moved. One had a tear running down his cheek. Although they ruled against Otis, they did so with visible reluctance and unusually respectful language. What made Otis's argument so revolutionary? By the way, today this does not seem to be that kind of a big deal. But in the 18th century, this was revolutionary. This was new ground. This was unheard of. I winged that part. What made Otis's argument so revolutionary? First, he said these writs violated the natural rights of British subjects. Otis argued that every man is an independent sovereign, subject to no law, but the law written on his heart. That's a quote. With inherent rights to life, liberty, and property. But then, and this was radical, he suggested that even an act of parliament could be void if it contradicted natural law. Think about what he was saying. There were limits to government power. That no king, no parliament, no government could cross. Unheard of. Earth-shaking. Then Otis rose like thunder and declared, "A man's house, though it may be ever so humble, is his castle." One of the most essential branches of English liberty is the freedom of one's house. No king's soldier, no agent of the crown could enter without just cause. Within these walls, within those walls, the rights of a free man reign supreme. With his fist raised toward the judges, screaming at the top of his lungs, he vowed that as long as God gave him the breath, he would oppose any instrument that turned free-born subjects into slaves and let petty officers spread terror and desolation into peaceful homes. And then the principle that echoed across the colonies and shook the British Empire to its very core. Taxation without representation is tyranny. In that single cry, he gave voice to the conviction that no man should be taxed except by his own consent through his chosen representatives. He argued that man's rights come from God and that government should only exist to protect those natural rights. The judges, yes, ruled against him. But history did not. His arguments scattered the first seeds of American independence, soon watered by patriots all across the colonies. John Adams wrote about that day. He said, "Every man in that crowded audience appeared to go away as I did, ready to take arms up against the writs of assistance." After the writs of assistance case, James Otis Jr. emerged as the most influential political thinker in colonial America. famous beyond belief. Between 1762 and 1769, he published a series of pamphlets that helped lay the intellectual foundation for the American Revolution. His most important work appeared in 1764. It was called "The Rights of the British Colonies Asserted and Proved." In it, Otis argued that colonists possessed the same natural rights as any people on earth. He wrote, the colonists are by the law of nature free-born, as indeed all men, white or black. This was unheard of. All men are free-born, white or black. In the 18th century. In 1764, ladies and gentlemen, that was a remarkable statement. One of the earliest, if not the earliest, challenges to slavery in the American political thinking and writing at the time. Otis grounded his argument in a powerful principle. Government exists only by the consent of the people. And that people are not representative. They cannot justify being taxed. He wrote, the very act of taxing those who are not represented appears to me to deprive them of one of their most essential rights. This spread like wildfire all across the colonies. What kind of impact did that have? Well, 12 years later, they would appear in the immortal words of Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence. What made Otis' pamphlets so powerful was not just their ideas, but their language. He could quote ancient history, English law, yet he wrote in words ordinary people could understand. Like me. Farmers read them, merchants shared them, printers reprinted them all across the colonies. His arguments spread from town to town like sparks carried on the wind. British officials quickly recognized the danger. In London, members of Parliament warned about this dangerous writings of one James Otis. Even the king himself, George III, reportedly read Otis's work and called him the most dangerous man in America. And indeed he was. Because his ideas, once released, far more powerful than armies. And the ideas James Otis set loose in those pamphlets soon would shake the British Empire. By the mid-1760s, ladies and gentlemen, Otis was no longer just a lawyer. He was the intellectual architect of revolution. When the Stamp Act struck in 1765, Otis helped organize the Stamp Act Congress. Colonies stood together declaring with one voice the principle that he articulated years earlier: no taxation without representation. I just love saying those words. This was the moment the colonies found their voice, the moment America began to rise. Otis co-founded the Sons of Liberty with Sam Adams. He helped create the networks that would link resistance movements all across the colonies. He understood that ideas needed organization to become effective. In the Massachusetts House of Representatives, his speeches were said to be electrifying performances that combined legal argument with passionate oratory. By 1769, this once loyal British subject was writing of the indefeasible right of people to rid themselves of tyrants. The transformation of James Otis Jr. was now complete. He became something new in history, an American patriot, perhaps America's very first patriot. Here lies one of history's most heartbreaking ironies. At the very moment when the cause Otis championed was thundering towards victory, when liberty's flame was spreading from colony to colony, tragedy reached out and claimed the man who had started the fire. The voice that had moved a continent fell silent. The year was 1769. Revolution was spreading, filled the air. The words Otis had spoken were on every patriot's lips. His arguments lived in pamphlets and parlors, in the hearts of men sharpening their courage for what was coming. And James Otis Jr., the man who gave those men their voice, was coming apart. John Adams noticed the signs a few years before, watching with quiet dread of a man, like a man who loves someone and cannot stop what is coming. By 1769, ladies and gentlemen, that flicker of concern had become an alarm no one could silence. Adams wrote of him with aching precision. Otis is fiery and feverish. His imagination flames. His passions blaze. He is liable to great bouts of temper, sometimes in despondency, sometimes in a rage. The symptoms were devastating to witness. He would disappear for days and days without explanation, leaving his family with fear. He would wander the cobblestones of Boston, arguing brilliant legal cases to no one. His magnificent mind, locked in a furious conversation with phantoms only he could see. The man who had once held judges and juries breathless was now losing debates with shadows. He began to live between two worlds. In brief moments of clarity, the old James Otis would return, suddenly sharp, brilliant, fully himself, but just for a fleeting time. Then just as quickly, the darkness would close in again, and take him back. In those rare moments of clarity, he understood what was happening to him. And I will say to you, Mercy Otis, his sister, said, when he had those rare moments of clarity, it was extremely emotional for him. He wept, finally knowing what was happening to him. That awareness that he was slipping away and still knowing it became perhaps his deepest suffering. Modern historians believe he suffered from manic depression or schizophrenia, conditions that today could be treated. But this was the 18th century. No answers, no hope, no relief. Then came September 1769, and the blow that may have sealed his fate. At the British Coffee House, a confrontation with customs official John Robinson, who Otis rightfully accused of corruption. Words flew, tempers flared. Robinson raised a heavy cane and brought it down repeatedly on Otis's head. Blows delivered to a mind already at war with itself, deepening the damage to a man who had been America's sharpest weapon against tyranny. Dr. Joseph Warren, subject of an upcoming program, tended to him with devotion. John Adams came to visit. He sat with his old friend and looked into the eyes that once blazed with the nation's conscience. What he saw broke his heart. He wrote, I never saw such an object of admiration, reverence, contempt, and compassion all at once. Can you feel, ladies and gentlemen, the cruelty of that timing? Just as James Otis's ideas were spreading across the colonies, just as his words were shaping the moral foundation of a revolution, just as the dream he had spoken aloud was coming to be the creed of a new nation, the mind that gave it birth went dark. And the man who lit that spark could no longer tend the flame. His devoted family, his wife Ruth, sister Mercy, and their children tried everything. They all watched helplessly as he slipped further and further away. But they never stopped trying. But the brilliant mind that ignited a revolution was lost to darkness. Though he lived to see the Declaration of Independence, the very document that embodied his principles. Let me say that again. Though he lived to see the Declaration of Independence, the very document that embodied his principles, Otis's name had faded from the spotlight. The assault became a rallying cry, though, for colonial patriots who saw it as another example of British brutality against American leaders. Colonial newspapers throughout America reported the incident, turning Otis into a martyr, a symbol of British oppression. By the end of the decade, Otis's public life largely came to an end. From 1769, almost continuous until his death, Otis was what they called harmlessly insane. If you'd like me to digress a moment, I'll give you a little more information on that. They passed him around Boston to various households, and those households were responsible to watch him. So it was like a community effort to keep an eye on him. He was harmless, but he could get himself into predicaments pretty easy. So they shared that responsibility in little Boston at the time. From Patriot House to Patriot House, they took turns keeping an eye on him. But they referred to him as harmlessly insane. Younger, stronger leaders began to take the stage. Washington, Jefferson, Hancock, Sam Adams. And James Otis Jr., the intellectual father of American liberty, watched from the shadows of his broken mind. In whispered despair, Otis confessed, "I wish God would strike me down with a bolt from the sky." One day in 1783, a dark storm rolled over the Massachusetts sky, and a single blinding flash, the heavens answered the man who had once called down the fire on tyranny. Otis was struck by a bolt of lightning as he stood in a friend's doorway, a cruel irony for a man whose brilliant mind had once electrified a nation. And when I say a friend's doorway, if you just recall my previous comments, it was somebody that was responsible for him for that given week or day. But lightning could not silence James Otis Jr. His words still thunder across our nation. Every major revolutionary principle traces back to his visionary arguments. When Jefferson wrote, "All men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights," he was building on frameworks Otis developed decades earlier. When our Constitution later bound government with written laws and checks, it was giving legal form to what Otis had argued in that Boston courtroom, that there are limits fixed by God and nature that rulers may never cross. The rallying cry that became America's battle hymn, etched forever into our heritage, was first declared by Otis in 1761, and once again, taxation without representation is tyranny. His vision of a government as a federation of equals inspired our republican system. His belief that even government have limits they cannot cross became central to our constitutional law. We rightly honor the giants of our revolution, ladies and gentlemen. The father of our country, George Washington. The author of our liberty, Thomas Jefferson. The titan of Congress, John Adams. The diplomat, Benjamin Franklin. And the man with the bold signature, John Hancock, subject of a future program. But tonight, ladies and gentlemen, we remember another name, one too often forgotten, James Otis Jr., one of the first great voices of American liberty, whose intellect was no less vital, whose courage was no less fierce, and whose words helped awaken a people destined to be free. In 1761, on that cold winter morning in a crowded Boston courtroom, James Otis rose and did the unthinkable and changed the course of world history. He stood against the power of an empire. He stood alone for liberty. And in that moment of defiance, he helped give birth to something new in human history: the American spirit. A fierce devotion to liberty, an unshakable belief in justice, and a conviction that free people must govern themselves. And in that moment, Otis chose conscience over comfort, principle over safety, and truth over power. And with that choice, he lit a fire that spread across 13 colonies until a new nation was born. Born in liberty, born in courage, born in the belief that rights come not from government, but from Almighty God, a sacred gift to all mankind. A nation now 250 years strong this year. Happy birthday, America. But when we honor James Otis Jr., we do not only honor a brilliant mind or courageous patriot. We honor something greater, ladies and gentlemen. We honor the spirit of America itself, the unyielding faith in freedom that sparked a revolution and still lives in every generation that refuses to surrender it. The American spirit born in that Boston courtroom still lives on. And as long as it endures, the dream James Otis helped awaken will never perish from God's earth. He is gone, but the fire he began has never gone out. Thank you, and happy birthday, America. God bless you all. Anybody have any questions? If I don't know the answer, I'll make something up. Old football legend. Professor, please.
I was interested in particular in your discussion of the writs of assistance, am I correct?
Yes, sir.
And how they are parallel to what the ICE agents are doing right now.
Well, sir, that's a political question.
Yes, it is.
I cannot answer that
I
in this
understand.
format. I don't think it would be right, because in this room we have various political opinions on things of that matter, so it would not be fair for me to answer that. So if you'll, I beg your indulgence, but I'm staying away from those kind of questions. Anybody else? No questions? Yes, ma'am.
I said you answered them all.
Oh, all right. Hey, listen, thank you very much, everybody. Hey, come to the next program. What's the next program? Dr. Joseph Warren. Dr. Joseph Warren. Give him the date, Jack.
May 11th.
Yes, ma'am, please.
You told us how many people you
How many?
And you
Oh.
said you have people.
Well, I'll tell you, how many programs I have?
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness, I must have 25 or 30. And by the way, I was asked to speak by a very prominent lady in town who I could not say no to. And I have 30 programs, and I thought she'd pick one. But she says, I'd love for you to have a program on Lady Liberty. I don't have one. So what do you think I've been doing the last few days? Working on the Statue of Liberty, right? So I got one. I got the Gilded Age. I just finished up. I have. I don't have.
Doolittle Raiders.
Doolittle Raiders.
Which she'll do in December here.
Yes. Well, thank you for the question, man. But lots of them. That's kind of my hobby, I guess. In my retirement. What's that? Well, Mr. Gross says it's my passion. Okay. I'll take that. Yes, ma'am.
You didn't need an introduction, but tell us who you are for those of us who haven't met you.
I'm the wife of Jackie Zufall, who is not here. Oh, there she is back there. Yes. Yes. I don't know who I am. I'm just, I lived in Alliance most of my life. I'm originally from Canton. I went to school in Canton. I was a automotive management consultant for 30-some years. And retired about 8 years now. And since, by the way, I traveled in my job. So in my job, to keep myself out of trouble, I read. Right? So I became very interested in these things and a lot of these subjects. And I traveled basically the Western Hemisphere. And there's a lot of things I wanted to do, but I wasn't here to do them. So when I retired, I had so much I wanted to do in such a short period of time, because I couldn't do it because I wasn't here. So this was one of them. Getting involved in a community was another one. I'm trying very hard in that regard. The clock is ticking.
We're all over.
Yes, sir.
What inspired you to start the program?
Well, I will tell you that I never had a problem speaking in front of groups because I did that for a living. I spoke to groups sometimes as many as 30 or 40, sometimes hundreds. And I did it every week for many, many years. So I was comfortable. So you combine that with my love of history, and you notice my programs are historic in nature. So just put those two together. And by the way, I like to write too, and research. So that all came together, Mike, and here I am. You have to put up with me now.
What was the first one you did?
Winston Churchill. Who's here for Winston Churchill? Huh? Hey, and you know what I will tell you? And now, I'm not a braggart, right? But my buddy Jack was standing outside that door, and it was so packed, we had to turn people away. We did it twice by popular demand, and Jack was turning people away at the door because he couldn't get everybody in here. And what a great time I had doing it. We had a lot of fun with that. And what a character. Huh? The Grosses were here twice. So it was Winston Churchill. And I've done Teddy Roosevelt, General MacArthur. Forgive my memory. I don't like doing people that, like George Washington. God bless him, but everybody knows about George Washington. I don't believe he cut that cherry tree down, but everybody knows about him. I like to talk about people maybe people do not know as well as what they might. So that's what I like to do.
So are you like to write or either put these together for others to read, like you put them together into a book or
I've never thought about that. I don't consider myself the book kind of type person, right?
I mean, what you wrote, you know,
Yeah.
you could put them together in a bunch of good short clips.
Yeah, my wife's tired of seeing me with a laptop on my lap, though. And it's getting to the point where I take my laptop to bed with me, and if I wake up with a thought, I got my laptop right there, and so.
For people who have not seen your Winston Churchill program, not only is it interesting, but my friend said becomes Winston Churchill during the presentation.
I got his belly.
And it was a joy, and still is a joy, to see him with that cigar.
Thank you all for coming. Please come next week. Please come next month. Bring a friend. Bring an enemy. Mel, it did, Mel.
Well, I got here at 7. Next time.
All right, buddy.